Hey, I'm Lana from Lana Glowshot Art, and in this video, we'll be unboxing the November 2024 SketchBox. This box is all about learning how to draw hair as we explore some unique and playful graphite supplies. Ready? Let's go! The surface in this month's box is the Stillman & Byrne Zeta Series White Mixed Media Paper. This heavyweight surface is perfect for both the wet and dry techniques we will be using throughout this video. We also have 3 Derwent Graphitint pencils in Cocoa, Green Gray, and Juniper, and the SketchBox Signature Flat Shader Brush in size 6. Graphitint pencils are a combination of watercolor pigment and graphite, which can be used dry, or you can add water to them with the shader brush as I'm doing here with Cocoa. When you keep a sharp point on these pencils, they can be used to create texture, render fine details, and to lay in the dark values. But when you add water, the color becomes more obvious, as you see here with the violets in this Juniper pencil. The last color in this set is Green Gray, but remember that you have a variety of other colors available to you through strategic color mixing. The prompt this month is hair, and as we learn how to render hair convincingly, we often go through a phase where we represent wavy or curly hair like this. But drawing wavy hair realistically is more about focusing on the darker shadow shapes and layering than literally drawing curly lines. I'll demonstrate this technique using the Cocoa and Juniper pencils. I began with the Juniper pencil mapping in the basic shapes of the hair, paying really close attention to the actual shapes I'm seeing in my photo reference rather than what I think wavy hair should look like. Once the general composition is mapped out, I switch over to my Cocoa pencil and begin to apply more value to the shadows. When I lay in the shadows, I'm not thinking about drawing individual hairs, but I am considering the direction that the hair is curling and waving in, and I am making my pencil go in that direction. To deepen some of these shadows, I add a little bit more Juniper into the darker areas, and then I activate with water, intentionally pulling some of those lighter washes into the lighter areas and keeping more density and darkness in the shadow shapes. If I am looking for a really loose sketch, this could be where I finish. But if you want a little bit more depth and texture, allow this layer to dry and then come in again with another layer. In the second layer, I am applying more pressure with my pencils and building up more darkness in those shadow shapes. I am also continuing to pay attention to the direction that the hair is moving, and for this particular sketch, I am looking at the temperature of the curls. So in those warmest areas, I'm really allowing my Cocoa to shine, and then in those darker shadow shapes or where it becomes more dull, I'm leaning into Juniper or mixes between Cocoa and Juniper. You can continue to layer pencils and activate with water, let it dry, layer pencils, activate with water, let it dry as many times as you would like until you get the final texture and look that you're going for. Next, we have 3 Graphitint paint pans in Ocean Blue, Autumn Brown, and Meadow. Similar to Graphitint pencils, the Graphitint paint pans are a combination of color and graphite. By adding water, you can create lighter washes as I'm doing here with Ocean Blue. These paint pans are also a great material to use to explore different marks that you can make with your shader brush. The Autumn Brown is a very warm tone, a little bit more red and more vibrant than the Cocoa pencil. And Meadow is our most vibrant color in this whole set with a yellow-green hue. These 3 colors create a modified set of primaries, with Ocean Blue acting as your blue, Autumn Brown as your red, and Meadow as your yellow. Mix these colors together to create modified secondary colors like violets and oranges, which you'll see me do later on in this video. We're going to build up to drawing a braid as we explore the prompt hair. But before we do this with actual hair, let's look at a simplified version of this form, the twisted challah braid. This will allow us to study how the lights and darks are distributed on this form before we add in the hair texture. I started by sketching in the basic contours or outlines with the Juniper pencil. Then, using just the Ocean Blue paint pan, I began to render the form. Adding just a bit of water to my paint pan, I start with the darkest darks first. And in this photo reference, these darkest parts are on the underside of each of these twists. Once I apply a darker value, I quickly add some more water and apply it to the top edge of that shadow. And I begin to add more and more water as I move up and round out each of these twists. I go through each segment the exact same way, starting with my darker values and then modulating and adding water to lighten them up. Once this layer is completely finished, I let it dry completely so I don't get any wet on wet effects, and then I dive back in with another layer of ocean blue. In that first layer, I was really just getting a feel for where the shadows are, but now I'm building up enough value so that the darks are dark enough. I'm particularly using really deep ocean blue with just the tiniest bit of water to really get those deep, dark crevices in between each twist. This is allowing each section of the twist to act as an individual unit. Continue to look at your photo reference, soften the edges of your shadows, and modulate the value until you get it exactly the way that you want it. Next, we have the Jacquard Mixed Media Graphite Powder and the Art Alternatives 6-Well Palette. This graphite powder can be applied to your paper dry with your paintbrush or your finger to create a variety of values. For those lightest values, just use the tiniest bit of graphite powder and work it into the tooth of your paper with your paintbrush and finally your finger. When you use your finger, you're going to be pushing the pigment further into the paper, so I would tend to reserve the really heavy pressure for the darker values. As I move to my mid and darker values, I'm adding more graphite powder and applying more pressure and blending with my finger. For the darkest value, I actually apply 2 different layers. I use the brush to apply the graphite powder, rub it in, add a little bit more graphite powder, rub it in again. Varying the amount of graphite powder and pressure allows me to create distinct values. Graphite powder can also be mixed with water in your palette to create a wide variety of values. More water equals lighter values. If you're looking to create a really solid block of color, I would recommend building this up in layers because the way that the graphite suspends in the water tends to show the mark of the brush quite a bit and to be a little bit inconsistent. And I love this about it. It creates a much more painterly effect. Let's put all these supplies together and draw a braid. Beginning with the juniper pencil, sketch in that twist shape that we practiced with the challah thread. Once you feel like your braid is accurate, you can begin to lay in value. I began with a dark wash of my graphite powder and mixed in a bit of autumn brown so that I would have a deep, rich, warm color for the shadows. And then I applied this color to the underside of the twists in this braid. Using this same mixture as a base, I added a little more autumn brown and a little bit more water to lighten it up, and I used this tone for the shadows on the other side of the twist and for some of the texture closer to the head. For the background, I'm mixing the Graphitint Ocean Blue with some of the graphite powder to create a deeper, less saturated blue. After this layer of paint is completely dry, I begin to come in with my pencils and build up the texture of the braid. I go in the direction that the twist is moving and I pay attention to value, but I'm laying it in linearly so that it creates that texture of the hair. For each of these twists, it's a little bit lighter in the center or the belly of the twist. So I allow my lines to disappear or lighten up as they move towards the center and then get darker as they move into those creases where they're overlapping. Once I feel pretty good about the texture that I've established, I come in with water, but also with a little bit of my paint pans to create some new colors and to push the warmth in the braid a little bit more. As I activate the pencil strokes with water, I don't want to get rid of the texture of the hair. So I am continuing to move my brush in the direction that the braid is twisting in, and I'm creating some hairs with the brush as well. As I move this braid towards the finish line, I continue to tweak the value, working with washes of the graphite powder mixed with paint pans for a little bit extra tone. Once the values were just right, I felt like I needed to add a little bit more texture in. And I did this with the pencils over dark washes of color, utilizing a wet on wet approach, which provided me with more feathered lines and brighter colors. Now let's practice hair on a portrait. To get this portrait started, I'm starting with really loose guiding lines and I'm working from general to specific. Each layer with my pencil, I'm adding a little bit more pressure as I'm becoming more and more confident with my proportions. These proportions don't have to be perfect at the beginning because all of the products that we're going to be using for this project are very forgiving and you can continue to tweak and adjust as needed. Once my proportions were solidified, I began to lay in the background. This is mostly the Meadow paint pan, but I also added in a little bit of graphite powder to desaturate that bright yellow green and also to deepen the value in some areas, like right here by the side of the face. This background color allows me to have something for all of the colors in the face to refer to as I am painting and layering all of the features. Using that same dark green color that I created, I laid in a little bit of color in the sweater, and then I jumped into the face, focusing predominantly on the shadows and the temperature of the skin. This is mostly done with the autumn brown, and I'm using a lot of wet on wet effects so that I can get the paint to bleed into other areas and to create some soft transitions. I'm moving pretty quickly on this first layer, and as I come into the hair, I'm really focused on those shadow shapes that we talked about earlier in this video, and I've used a combination of autumn brown and meadow to create a nice, warm, rich shadow shape. I continue to use the wet on wet effects so that I get a really soft atmospheric effect in the beard. I allow this to dry completely, and now it's time to come in and refine the details with the pencils. Using these pencils on top of the really abstract atmospheric background allows me to have that painterly approach at the beginning and then to come in and control and refine it in future layers. But I could have also come in and added a lot of structure in my drawing with the pencils and then come over with the paint pans. And I demonstrate this approach in the basic video for this month. So I encourage you to check that out. This paper holds so many layers, so you can continue to layer as much as you want. When it comes to the hair on the top of the head for this portrait, less is definitely more. I want to, of course, look for the shadow shapes in the hair and make sure that my value is on and that my lines are going in the correct direction. But when it comes to that lighter hair on the top, I'm going to leave that untouched. Getting in and fiddling with it too much is going to make it look more like a cartoon or look like it's overworked. So a couple lines with your pencils and then adding some water to smooth it out should take care of this completely. As you move into the beard, you definitely want to make sure that your values are spot on. I found that combining a couple pencils and then also adding in some paint pan mixed with graphite powder could be great ways to deepen the value enough so that that is one of the darkest parts of the drawing. And of course, if it isn't dark enough when you step back and assess your drawing, you can always let your drawing dry completely and then come back in again. This goes for value and it also goes for detail. For this final pass, I'm coming in and adding more life, more depth, and more detail to the features of the face. If you start really general, you get an opportunity to organize your drawing and your shapes and keep it loose, and then you always have the opportunity to tighten it up later on. But if you approach your drawing in the opposite way, bringing in tons and tons of detail at the beginning, it can be almost crippling because it's hard to make a mark because you feel like you're going to mess something up. Play around with this approach of moving from general to specific, and I think you'll really enjoy the results. Now this piece is complete. I hope you learned a ton about working with fun experimental graphite supplies and drawing hair, and we can't wait to see what you create. So be sure to use the hashtag SketchBoxNovember when you post your work online. For more unboxing videos and tutorials, you can check out our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.